Good day and greetings everyone. Darth Boreas here. Today I'm talking about Star Wars once again. This time I want to go in the practice of how to make lightsabers actually work in real life, or make them more plausible in the Star Wars universe and give them actual fighting styles. Before I do that, I want to do a quick addition to the last video on the theory. I forgot something about Soriso. Like Darth Sana used Soriso to buy herself time to cast her Sith sorcery spells as the offensive. So that's also something I need to mention. Jedi and Sith alike can theoretically use all of these styles. They are not limited, though usually Jedi don't use Chuyo, and if they do, it's somehow called Vapat, though it's basically the same thing. And they usually don't use Ataru, while Sith usually don't use Soriso and usually do not use what's it called, the basic form Shicho. They can, there's no reason why they shouldn't, it's just not their typical style, because say Shicho was basically used with normal blades before they were lightsabers, and are not particularly attuned towards lightsaber combat. So with that said, I also want to make an addition that there's actually another set of pairing these fighting styles, and that's actually the thing that Luke went with, because Luke didn't know the 7 forms before. He basically just was thrown in there and had to figure it out later with holocrons. And Luke created in his timeline 3 different styles that are really combinations. So you have form 1, which would be fast style, which is basically a mix of Soriso and Ataru, so a strong defense where you don't really move yourself. And then when you go to the attack, you do absolutely crazy nuts stuff with your attacks. That's the fast style, which according to Darth Bane in one book is also a style he would recommend to for Sith that like Darth Sana, that focus more on force powers. Then you have medium style. Medium style is basically Shicho paired with Makashi. That's the whole idea: precise strikes, strong defense, all-rounder kind of stuff, which by the way is also something that Shicho is often called. It's called the all-rounder form, but that's also Niman, so whatever. And then you have strong style, and strong style is basically Shien / Chemso paired with Chuyo, where you hit really hard and do a lot of counters. That's the idea of strong style. Now, with that out of the way, let's go into how can any of these be practical. Well, first things first, HEMA is a historically European martial arts, is a great source for that, because in HEMA you have all kinds of different weapons that are used. Now, most HEMA manuals focus on the longsword, because the longsword is not only one of the most common weapons in the era where those treatises were written, but it's also a super versatile weapon that can be effective against pretty much all other kinds of weapons and armor levels. And not to mention that longsword is a cool weapon. The longsword is a cool weapon to have. Now, for all those who are completely new to this, longsword doesn't mean a long sword like a knight's sword, a medieval broadsword, or some medieval knight's sword. That's actually not a longsword. A longsword is any sword where if you have it at your feet, the hilt reaches at about chest height or higher. So it's usually a blade length of somewhere above 120 to 160 centimeters. If it's large, if it's this large or even larger, it's a two-handed sword. If it's about your own arm's length, it's a standard sword. If it's about your a little bit smaller than that, like this, it's a short sword. If it's the size of your forearm, it's basically a dagger. If it's smaller than that, it's a knife. That's the basic categorization. So longsword is the form that is most commonly used as the training form, which is why I'd say if you want to learn Shicho, a great way to actually make this usable is to go with longsword treatises, because you grip in Shicho, you grip the blade with both hands like you would with a long sword, and you're doing very basic movements, and most longsword techniques are fantastic for Shicho. You can like do this. You can use, well, basically you can use all kinds of cool material from longsword treatises to use with Shicho, and it works perfectly. No real problem there. It even fits the training form idea because it is derived from actual sword fight with no lightsaber mentality in mind yet, and it's absolutely fantastic because it's the basics. And the cool thing about longsword is that longsword is so versatile that if you are really good with the longsword, many of your longsword skills translate to other weapons. You know how to use two-handed weapons because you kinda know how to do the whole reach thing properly and generating force and stuff like that. You can use shorter blades because you often do half swording techniques where you intentionally shorten your blade. You can do leverage things, so you know how to fight with a stick basically. You can use it like an axe or a warhammer if you just turn the thing around, so you have more experience with that too. So longsword is really great for the basics, and longsword treatises will do fantastic with Shicho. By the way, Shicho was used by the ancient Sith a lot because the ancient Sith didn't use lightsabers, they used force sabers. What's a force saber? It's basically a magically enchanted normal metal blade, usually made of durasteel in all kinds of shapes and sizes and enchanted with the force. And the cool thing about force sabers is that those were absolutely superior to lightsabers in functionality because they were powered by the force, and the Sith used the force blades until they lost the knowledge on how to create them. So the Sith transitioned from the force sabers to the lightsabers, not because lightsabers were better, because they weren't. They transitioned because they just didn't know how to make the force sabers anymore. And that's when the Sith adopted the lightsaber, which by the way was still before the Jedi adopted the lightsaber, because the Sith invented the lightsaber. But they didn't transition until they lost the knowledge of how to make the proper Sith warblades. Now Sith warblades function perfectly fine like normal swords, which is why Shicho, which is made for normal swords, would be perfectly fitting for a Sith using a warblade. All of the other forms are said to have the lightsaber in mind. Now obviously in real life you don't really have that because you don't really have omnidirectional blades in real life, though we have styles that are similar, which is why I will go on to Makashi. Now Makashi is said to waste no movement, do very small movements, don't waste energy, be very precise, and use your blade with very small wrist movements basically. Where do we have that in real life? Fencing. May it be foil, épée, to some degree rapier, not so much saber fencing, but foil fencing, épée fencing works perfectly with Makashi. Rapier works even better because with rapier you also do strikes, which you don't really do with foil. With foil it's really more about stabbing, because the foil usually don't even have an edge, they just have a tip that is really pointy and the rest of the blade is round. So would translate pretty well to Makashi. And with Makashi you always would use one hand and use your blade in one hand, not grip with both, but always in one, so that you have the maximum reach advantage, and you'd stand like that so that your offhand doesn't get in the way, and then you just fence like this, with most movement coming from your wrist and the rest of your body moving in alignment with that, but you are really just doing small wrist movements. That would be Makashi, so foil, épée, rapier fencing would translate perfectly to Makashi, I think. Now Soresu is a bit more difficult, because Soresu is basically saying that you keep your sword moving and try to basically block any incoming strikes. Is there a real life equivalent to that? There is. Two-handers, Zweihanders, two-handed swords. Treatises with two-handed swords, you always keep the blade moving and keep the momentum going, because first of all these things are heavy. Well, relatively heavy. They're not that heavy. I think 3 kilos is pretty much the worst of it. So they're not that heavy, but they are heavy enough that momentum really comes into play, and you always want to keep your blade moving, because it's first of all, it's really tough to stop it because there is this much momentum, and secondly, your strikes are so much faster if you just keep it moving and move the momentum that is automatically generated. Also, with two-handed swords, you are not only always moving your blade, which perfectly is fitting for Surisu and what we see on screen, but the cool thing is that you are mainly using two-handed swords to create distance to your opponents. Historically, two-handed swords were not used for duels or for war in large armies, with few exceptions, but they were used by bodyguards, because the whole reason to use a two-handed weapon was that you can put your opponents in danger from far away, so they don't come close to you. The idea was that the bodyguard would, say, stand in a doorway or a small hallway or something like that, while the actual protected person escapes, and the other person doesn't try to win the fight, they try to buy as much time for the people running away as they can. And that means that if you constantly keep your blade moving, your attackers can't go in or go after the fleeing person without getting hit and probably get one shot, because these things have quite some power to them. So they really have to deal with you before they can deal with anyone else. And you are doing area denial, so you try to keep them from getting anywhere near you to basically survive as long as you can. The idea of the two-handed sword fighting style is really not to survive yourself, though that would be preferable, but it's really to just last for as long as you can and buy as much time as you can. If you are looking at a war, those are two-handed weapons are usually used like this to stab from a further distance, similar to spears, or to really do a huge swing at enemy infantry in order to break up formations. That's the basic idea of the two-handed sword. Now, in Surisu and two-handed swords alike, you always keep moving, you're always doing big swinging movements, you're using the momentum, and you're really all about area denial and defenses, because if your blade is constantly moving, you also can block an incoming attack more easily. That's Surisu. Now, Ataru is a bit more difficult, and I think there's very few people on this planet who can pull off Ataru in choreography or fight properly, because Ataru is basically capoeira with blades. So is it possible? Yes, but it is super difficult. You need to be super athletic, super dexterous to actually do that. Doing that in a choreography, very difficult, though technically speaking possible. And for real life example, I already said, capoeira has a very similar mindset to Ataru, so I guess capoeira would be your most fitting martial art to actually use with if you want to adopt Ataru. Now, Gemso and Chien, different topic. As said, they focus on counter strikes, and counter strikes is something that you do in basically all martial arts, but I would say that Chien here is most likely the thing that you would want to do if you have a katana. Now, many people will get mad at this statement, because samurai also about offense, and katanas have special properties because they are front heavy, while most swords are either balanced or hilt heavy, which means that normal swords are much more nimble and flexible, much more nimble and faster, while the katana has more oomph to it. So though katana styles also do focus a lot on single hits, you could probably also use it for Makashi to some degree, because the no wasted movement thing, but it's not so wrist heavy. But the katanas really focus more on counter strikes than many other sword fighting techniques. I'm not saying that others don't, but usually most sword fighting treatises either have a shield together with your one-handed weapon, and the shield does all the stuff while you counter, which you don't have with a lightsaber, or they are written for very long blades, like say a long sword, where you can stay out of reach yourself while countering. Because if you're countering, you may be open to attack yourself. So the katana is a relatively short blade. It's a pretty short sword, given that the Japanese only had scrap iron to make the weapons with, and katanas being super heavy for a sword. Like a katana is about twice the weight of a European sword of the same length. So yeah, that's a difference. And so if with the katana, it's much more important to actually do counter strikes and really try to block an incoming attack while attacking yourself. That becomes much more important with a katana, and that's why I think Shien is pretty fitting for katana usage. Now we have Niman, form 6, which is basically a meld of all other forms, which I'd say a real life equivalent. Pick whatever you want. Any real life treatise uses all of the other forms that we have discussed so far. That's just how real life treatises work. Now, if you want to have a style that really uses all of these, I'd kinda go with saber fencing, because with saber fencing you have the swinging and momentum thing, you have the more agile attacks, you still have a lot of wrist movement and precision, you're still not really using all that much use of your offhand, but you with your offhand you can use it from horseback. Saber fencing probably being closest to a mix of all the forms. Now, with that being said, we have Chuyo. Now, Chuyo is specifically basically you go nuts and just let yourself be driven by your emotions, just whack, 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 fast attacks. So is there any real world equivalent to this? Yes, it's called Somafera. It's basically fighting with an adrenaline rush, with an adrenaline high. It's what supposedly the berserkers or similar groups like the Tigerman and stuff like that used historically. And it's a bit special, because with that I don't think swords anymore. If you go full offense with fast attacks, swords are probably not the weapon you want to use. If you do, I'd say again katana styles might work, because katanas are front heavy and very offensive weapons, pretty bad at defense. So katanas might work rather well with Chuyo. For European swords, I can't really think of one that's particularly good for Chuyo. Some would say two-handers, but two-handers, you're not fast with two-handed weapons. So the closest thing I'd come up with is axes or similar weapons like maces, because those are very offensive, they suck at defense, they are really, really bad for defense, and you can just go hard and whack things quickly and keep the momentum going to do that. So treatises that focus on maces might actually be the preferential ones, because maces have more or less the same capabilities as a lightsaber. As example, axes can hook. You have a hook with an axe that you can use to get an opponent's arm out of the way or their foot out of the way. You can put in the neck and pull them forward. Axes can do that, swords can't. Axes can be used to block and stop with the head of the axe, which lightsabers can't do. So axes might not be the best idea here, but think maces. Those should work in special large ones, like what's the Japanese one called with the iron reinforcements, kanabo. That might work. You might think basically pole weapons, European pole arms could work pretty well. Halberd not so much. A glaive could work. Most pole arms like Danax, similar to that, maybe could work. That's basically the idea for Chuyo. Now for Charkai, in real life you usually didn't use two blades of the same length, because they would get into each other's way. So a classical Charkai style for dual wielding would be rapier and dagger. That's basically the treatise you want to focus on. That's basically want to go with, because that's actually the real life equivalent to that. Now if you think staff, pretty easy thing to do. Just think bow staff or any staff treatise. You can use it similarly, though you have to keep in mind that you cannot grip any further than the center of the blade of the staff, because that kind of wouldn't work. So be careful with that. if you want to have the whole idea of, like Cal Kestis does it with a blaster and a sword, happened in real life too, like pirates and many early gun times had a gun with one or two shot, well, usually just one shot before you had to reload. So they had a gun in one hand and usually a rapier or saber in the other hand, and then they used the one shot they had if there was an opportune time, and the rest they were just fighting, and then they only used the pistol to block or use the butt of the pistol to whack people with. That's a treatise that you can look into as well. As for unarmed combat, I guess any martial art that focuses on unarmed combat will do just fine. And I think with that I've gone on long enough. Thank you for watching, have a fantastic day, and may the force be with you.